You're Free to Go is sponsored by Milburn Men's Clothing, where top athletes shop for sharp, tailored style. And whether Marc and I are in the studio or the courtroom, Milburn dresses us for success. Mention YFTG and get 10% off at Milburn Men's Clothing, which has been providing the finest in men's clothing and suits since 1946. Call 651 645 2922 or visit www.milburn.com. Welcome back to You're Free to Go. Happy to have you all listening once again to our latest episode. You know, a lot of people ask where we came up with our name, and I think most people can relate to the experience that when they get pulled over for speeding and the officer uses some discretion, they exercise discretion, and they say, okay, I'm just going to let you go with a warning this time, just slow it down, and they say, you're free to go. That's kind of the experience they feel, right? So everyone can relate to it, but for us as litigators, not only do we know that experience, but we also have the experience that when a jury comes back with a not guilty verdict, the greatest line a defense lawyer can hear and their client can hear is when the judge turns to the defendant and says, you're free to go.
Free to go.
Yeah, now not all cases work out that way, but a lot of ours do.
Yes.
Yeah, so
we've got some stories about them.
Yes, and we're going to share them with you throughout the series of this You're Free to Go podcast over the years.
So you've got something for us today?
Yeah, I do, and it's interesting because I just entered with talking about our favorite line at the end of a trial to say you're free to go. Well, in this case, I actually represented a victim, so we were hoping to hear at the end of the case, you're not free to go, right? So yeah, I'll share that with our listeners today.
Sure, go ahead.
But first I want to lay the field out because they may say, well, wait, you guys are criminal defense lawyers. What do you mean you represent a victim? I always think of myself as a criminal law attorney. I started as a prosecutor. I did that for 4 years, and I learned that side of the case. I learned from the moment a complaint comes in, whether it's through a 911 call or someone showing up at the police department to make a complaint, all the, or showing up at a scene, law enforcement, all the way through the whole process until the case gets criminal charges get filed, a prosecutor gets assigned, and it shows up in the courtroom. So I knew that behind the scenes preparation of a case and so forth. So when a victim calls, I say, yeah, I can represent you. I know that side of the case as well. But of course, 99% of what we do is representing defendants, right? So, but I did get a case where a father called me, and he told me this was out in California, that his daughter had been killed. She died, and the police ruled it a suicide. He was positive beyond belief that his daughter did not commit suicide, and he wanted to hire me to kind of prove that. So because I knew how to build a case through being a prosecutor, and on the defense side for many, many, many years, we work with private investigators all the time. I said, well, we can, we'll investigate this for you. There's no promises, no guarantees that we'll reach the conclusion that you want us to reach.
Let me ask you a question, because it's not atypical that when a family member dies and commits suicide, it's very hard for the remaining members of the family, whether it be a father, mother, a son, a daughter, brother, sister, to accept that it was a suicide. In some cases, they would take the position that this father had with you, which is there's no way this is a suicide. Well, how do you decide, well, I'm not going to take this case because there's nothing there.
Right, and also I'm not a pathologist or forensic pathologist that does autopsies.
Was there any indication in what he told you
that
gave you reason to believe maybe this is something worth pursuing as opposed to a dead end, a dry well?
I was moved, but I do need to clarify for the record, I am the son of a pathologist who did many autopsies. So I did, from the dining room table, have some knowledge of forensic pathology and autopsies and causes of death. So when I spoke with the father, he did make some compelling arguments about the boyfriend that his daughter had, telling me that he was a drug dealer and that he had a long criminal history of domestic violence with girlfriends. He laid out the story that his daughter was really a great young woman. I think she was around 24, 25 at the time, and that the boyfriend traveled a lot. And he's like, she was always very in contact with me. And whenever the boyfriend was in town, she'd skip work. She wouldn't call me as much. When I did reach her, she didn't sound the same, as if she was on drugs, high on something. He said, and I obviously did not like the boyfriend, and I'm just very, very suspicious of him. And it's a good point you bring up, because I do recall when this happened that I was, trying to comfort him to say, this is horrific. I'm so sorry for your loss. And not sure that there really was, whether this was just his emotional saying it can't be a suicide.
He was skeptical.
Yeah. So, but I listened to him for quite a while before I said, let's see. I can't guarantee anything, but we will dig into this and we'll see what we can find. And I know from experience that officers, often because they're so busy, or maybe because they're lazy, or maybe because they're it's just outside of their wheelhouse. It's a knowledge that they just don't have. They'll often kind of just close out something.
Default to the suicide.
Right, and move on to something else. We've seen that. And so, we know how, as defense lawyers, as both of us being former prosecutors, we know how to package an investigation and present it either to law enforcement or to the prosecutor's office. So that's what I decided to do here. Let's investigate and see if we have anything that we can present to the police and then the prosecutor, hopefully, that shows.
So what did you do?
So the first thing I did was I called Dr. Michael Bodden. Michael Bodden, our listeners,
right?
I mean, super, super famous. He is the godfather of autopsies. Before this, I just had to look him up because I know he's famous. I know he's been on, and I didn't want to misstate anything. So I've got to tell you, of course, I handled the Jeff Epstein case, so I knew immediately. He did the autopsy for the defense for Jeff Epstein,
Right.
Ruled that it was not a suicide. But I want to see, I knew he had done a lot of other things. Who else? So I Googled it last night. He did George Floyd's autopsy. He did Aaron Hernandez, the Patriots, right? He was hired as part of a presidential kind of platform to reinvestigate the John F. Kennedy autopsy, the Martin Luther King Jr. autopsy. He's been an expert in over 100. He's done over 20,000 autopsies. He's been an expert witness in countless trials. He did John Belushi's autopsy. He did the Yankee manager.
Is he still alive?
He is still alive. He's
Should pay you for this now.
Yeah. He's in his late 80s. He's kind of retiring. No, I'm telling you, this guy, I need our audience to know he is the man. Like,
Right.
he did Yankee manager Billy Martin. He did Marlon Brando's son. He did O.J. Simpson. He did Kobe Bryant. He
Hey,
teaches.
can we get him on the show?
I'll call him. You know what? He's semi-retired. I think we could get him.
Maybe.
So the guy's written books. He's the best of the best. So I call him up. I'd worked with him on some other stuff before, so he knew me, took my call. And I tell him this unusual situation. He's like, I'm all in. He said, I'll fly in from New York, and all you need. I said, what do you need from me? He said, have someone pick me up, take me to the funeral. Her body was at the funeral home. He said, I can do it there. I can do the autopsy there. Have someone bring me there. I'll bring all my tools, but I need an assistant. He's like, you could do it for me. Be my assistant. So, and then he kind of chuckled. Yeah, me. And then he chuckles. So I said, okay, we got you all set up. We picked the date. I pick him up at the airport. I'm driving. He said, all right, thanks. Got everything. Thanks for picking me up. Who'd you get for my assistant? I said, I'm going to be your assistant. He said, well, Guy, I've done 20,000 autopsies in my career, and I've said that to every lawyer who's hired me. Hey, you could be my assistant. And they all run. He's like, you are the first one ever to actually say, I'll be your assistant.
Didn't know you're back.
Thanks, you're right. Like our viewers know, I'm the son of a pathologist. And, through high school and college, I had a side job and made money working in the laboratory with my at the hospital in my town I grew up in. And I had actually participated in autopsies. So he was excited to have me participate in it. And it was interesting. His findings were conclusive that she did not commit suicide.
Huh.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a couple
How did he
things.
make that determination?
Well, the first thing he did was, without examination, the police report said she used a shotgun. He said, Guy, statistically, women do not commit suicide with a gun. And if they do use a gun, it is never a shotgun. He said women, the far majority of women, this is statistically proved, commit suicide by taking pills. They overdose on pills. And he's like, that's like 46% of the time. He said the second most common, which I had no idea of, he said like 35% of the time, is by actually losing blood. They'll cut their wrist and bleed out. He said,
bath or something.
yeah, in a bath, right.
Yeah.
He's like, so just right off the bat, before I even look at this young lady, I know the fact that the reports say she used a shotgun, it's very, very, very unlikely. So that was his first thing. He then, when we got to the autopsy, he looked at the entry wound where the bullet went into her. It was actually her skull, and it was on an angle. And he said if someone's going to hold a gun up to their head, it's going to be flush and or so forth. So he was able to look at it and see that this doesn't make sense, that if she's shooting herself, that it was on this particular angle. He then so he had several things. The next thing he said was he was able to measure her arm and measure the shotgun. And he said her arm is too short, the length, but the shotgun is longer than her arm. So there would really be no way, she could have maybe skimmed her skull or
just couldn't
right,
pull the trigger.
Right, she wouldn't be able to pull the trigger. It just physically, it did not make any sense.
Huh.
He said, of course, she could have pulled the trigger at some point and it could have hit her somewhere, but it wouldn't have made this type of entry wound. Then he actually listened to the 911 call, and it was interesting because the 911 call, the boyfriend made the call. I should have prefaced this by letting everyone know that she allegedly committed suicide in front of the boyfriend in their bedroom. They were renting a room in a home. It was actually a garage that had been converted into a bedroom, and the people who owned the home were renting that garage out to them. And you're from California. The weather's always perfect there. So, because I thought when I first heard, who lives in a garage? Well, the weather's so nice that they didn't even need air conditioning.
Don't have air conditioning.
Right. So they were very comfortable living in a garage. So the boyfriend was present. So he called 911. And Dr. Michael Bodden listened to the 911 tape very carefully. And the way the boyfriend described what happened, he expected, Dr. Bodden, that the body should be in a certain position when it fell to the ground. And he could tell based on where one of her arms was underneath her body that his description of what happened physically didn't make sense either. And so there were just a number of things like that.
Was the wound indicative of a shotgun?
Yes, 100%. He concluded she died from a shotgun. And then the other thing, which he said was really probably the most important fact of evidence, was the blood splatter. And there's a whole science, as
right.
you and I know, whole science on blood splatter. And based on, he said that the splatter, it reached much farther from the body than it would have if she had shot herself. Meaning, he said whoever shot her was at least 2 feet away from her and not right next to her, because the splatter went farther than it would have if it had just been her shooting herself.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he had a lot of reasons why. And he recommended that after part of his exam isn't just the physical. He interviewed the father as well, because he wanted to know, well, what do you know about this boyfriend? What do you know about your daughter, and so forth. So it's a whole micro approach to his autopsy. And when he heard the father talk about the boyfriend, which is what one of the reasons why I explained a lot about him earlier in this episode, and he heard the background of this boy, that he travels a lot and that he's allegedly a drug dealer, he said, I think we should do a DNA sample of her hair. And I learned at that point, I knew you could test DNA for drugs and so forth, test hair for drug use. I didn't know until this case and this autopsy that every inch of hair goes back 2 months in time. So if you pull someone's hair in January, 1 inch can go back November, December, right? So she had long hair, and we were able to go back 2 years, 24 months. And this was the most remarkable thing we were able to do with Dr. Bodden's DNA lab that tested the hair. We were able to match the calendar of when the boyfriend was out of town and when he was in town, and show that when he was out of town, there was no drug use at all, and when he was in town, there was drug use. So, that doesn't make him a murderer, of course, and it doesn't mean he was forcing drugs on her. She was, early to mid-20s, so she was, partying with a boyfriend, right? But it all kind of started to build up a case that there is something more going on here. His second recommendation, outside of his physical exam, after talking to the father and saying let's DNA test the hair, was you guys should get a forensic evaluation of the 911 call. He said, I really think you need to dig into that more. He said, we can hear what we can hear, but these guys, and you and I have done that a lot of times with calls, because almost all cases nowadays have, a 911 call or some type of phone, recorded phone evidence. So we did follow his advice. We got an expert, our private investigator, and they were able to slow it down, increase the volume, and sure as hell, we actually hear, while the boyfriend is on the phone calling 911, we actually hear the girl in the background say no. And she says it twice. No, no. Now,
she's alive?
She is alive when
While
he made
he's
the
calling.
911 call. So it made no sense, but the doctor said no. If she got shot where she did in her skull, she would have died immediately. She's not talking after getting shot. So there was some scenario where he was calling on 911 even possibly before he shot her.
So he was setting the stage.
Yeah, setting a stage.
And more importantly, it meant that the story of what happened can't be true.
Correct. There were so many holes in it at this point. And again, it's important that you actually said this is like a famous pathologist, and this is why I laid it out for the listeners. The credibility that he has when we went to sit with the prosecutor, it's unequivocal. You don't question Dr. Bodden's findings. So we met with the prosecutor, first the police. We got them to agree to reopen the investigation. And by doing that at the same time, we basically met with the prosecutor's office. And what was interesting, and I think you've probably seen this too, Marc, they were reluctant. They said, before even we look at this, one of our concerns is if we ever do file charges, the defendant, the boyfriend, will hire a criminal defense lawyer, a good one like you. And the first thing they're going to say is, you can't prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt because there was already a conclusion drawn that it was a suicide. So now you say, well, one group is saying suicide. Months later, you're saying, no, it wasn't suicide. Good luck proving this beyond a reasonable doubt. And the prosecutor was really concerned about that. So they allowed us to present everything to them. They were moved by the evidence that we presented. And so at the end of the discussion, and the father wasn't there. He was very, very emotional over it. I kept him in the loop every step of the way. The prosecutor said, we do see evidence that there's a crime here. We're not sure we can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. We need to develop that further. But we're going to have a conversation with the defendant. So they did reach out
with the
boyfriend.
At that point, he wasn't a defendant.
Right, correct. Right. He is now, I guess, technically a suspect or a target of the investigation.
Right.
He immediately lawyered up, which was fine. Right. It's better. He comes in with a lawyer. They start talking, and the prosecutor laid their case out for him, and which is not unusual. And they said, "Here's what we got. Here's our plan to charge and so forth." And they entered a dialogue over the next 2 months where they said, "We'll agree." The boyfriend would ultimately agree to plea guilty to first-degree murder for a very, very reduced sentence. So simultaneous to filing criminal charges, they would enter a plea of guilty and the case would be closed within a sentence. So we spent several weeks trying to decide what to do. The father, he was really focused on having this kid accept responsibility. He wasn't so much focused on the term of the sentence, although he wanted him to go away forever. Right. And in the end, he did the now defendant, or the boyfriend who became defendant, agreed to a 10-year sentence, pled guilty, and so that it didn't tie up the court time. It wasn't a prolonged litigation and followed by a trial and so forth. It was a resolution that the father was satisfied with, where this boyfriend entered a plea of guilty. He was arrested, charged, pled guilty, and sentenced to 10 years in prison. And he's a convicted felon.
Well, many of our listeners would probably say, how do you justify just giving somebody a 10-year sentence for cold-blooded murder like that? But of course, you got to consider the fact that if he had not agreed just as you said earlier, there's a substantial chance that the prosecutor may not have filed the case
That's right.
because there was concern that there wasn't a lot of evidence. The burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. If I was the defense attorney, I would say, you don't have a case.
Right.
You may have a lot of ideas here. You may have probable cause, but you're not going to be able to prove this case to a jury. That's a great case for a defense attorney. So in the end, when we talk about justice being done, that was probably, under the circumstance, the right way to go because he accepted responsibility, got a 10-year sentence, which obviously is too light for that. Yeah. But at the same time, they were able to make a case that they probably wouldn't have been able to make otherwise.
Right. And I think the boyfriend, then defendant, looked at it as it was a very big risk to go to trial,
Right.
To be charged and have to defend it, and kind of cut his losses, except, almost like a business decision for him that if I lose a trial, I'm going to go away for life.
Well, a lot of times that's what our clients do. We have to make business decisions or risk-reward ratio.
Risk-reward,
decision.
yeah.
And a lot of times, even though the client is insisting on being not guilty and we think we got a shot, we also have to weigh what is the likelihood of conviction, and if so, what kind of sentence would you face versus what we can achieve right now.
Right.
Of course, most of my cases are not murder cases, but yet, interestingly, in the money laundering and white collar cases I'm involved in, sometimes in the federal court, the guidelines are life.
That's right.
Or 30 years, 20 years.
So defendants also have no choice but to go to trial sometimes.
Right.
Why roll the dice when you might as well just go to trial?
That's a fascinating
case. And if this father hadn't, number one, had the resources, and number two, had the commitment to pursue this, his daughter's fate would have forever been remembered as a suicide. And there are a lot of people, unfortunately, in that situation that don't have the resources or the connections and so forth to try to hire the right people to really fully investigate.
There are a lot of unsolved crimes. I mean, no matter how many police officers you put out there, they're limited in terms of their time and their resources.
Right.
And when you can get a great team together like you did, investigator, the top flight pathologist, and devote the time to that, you can achieve something that typically doesn't happen. Well, kudos to you.
Thank you
for doing that.
Yeah. Wait, I want our listeners to know how far we go in our job as well, because people think, we just go to court and argue for our clients. Well, in this case, we really do whatever we can to help our clients,
right.
Especially a victim like this, do a lot of hand-holding, right? Well, because they're going through very scary, difficult times. Well, when the autopsy was finished, the father said to me, Guy, it really bothers me that she died alone. She died in the hands of, at this point we hadn't proven anything, convinced a murderer. And that's where she was, in front of a murderer, all alone. And it's really, really important to me that she not be alone when she's cremated. She had a will that requested to be cremated. And he's too emotional to do it. And he said it would mean
don't tell me you went.
It would mean the world to me and our family if you would be there to witness the cremation.
Wow.
And so I'd never had that request before. But we get close to our clients, especially if it's a victim like this, and it was something that I felt compelled to do to help him during his grief. And to report back to him that
that's a freaky experience.
It is a freaky experience. Having done autopsy with my father, though, in the pathology, the labs that I grew up in, I had never been involved in that. That's for sure. But it was important to the family, and I don't regret having done it. And I was able to report back to them.
Well, that's quite amazing.
Yeah.
So I think right now we are going to take a break for a commercial.
Yeah, right? Just a brief break, a quick moment to hear from one of our sponsors.
Sure.
You're Free to Go is sponsored by Lang Realty, South Florida's premier residential real estate broker. Whether you're buying, selling, or renting a home or condo, Lang's experienced realtors are standing by ready to help you. Contact one of Lang's top realtors today at 561-703-2427. Mark, you're up.
Well, I have an interesting story for our listeners. And at the beginning of this, you talked about how we love to hear, not always happens, but love to hear that magical not guilty verdict from the jury, and then the judge saying you're free to go, or words like that. Sometimes they use more formal words. But I had a very interesting case years back in which I got a call from a lawyer in the Bahamas who I had done business with in the past, and he said that he just got a call from a friend of his, a very prominent family in Marsh Harbor in the Bahamas.
The Abacos, right?
Yes.
Beautiful area.
Beautiful area.
Lots of little islands. People sail to each one. Yeah, it's gorgeous there.
And one of the members of the family, the son of the friend, was arrested and charged with alien smuggling in West Palm Beach in federal court. So I went and saw him in the lockup, and he had come into the United States on some flight, and as he stepped off the plane, the marshals came and arrested him, and he had no idea why, and they told him for alien smuggling, and he didn't even know what alien smuggling meant. In fact, when he told me, and it was funny, he said, alien smuggling, was this a sci-fi?
Right. I'm thinking a
crime?
UFO.
Right.
What, do you have a UFO on his boat or something?
Well, in any event, the story was that a boat, a large fishing boat that he had owned, as it was coming into the United States, developed some engine problems, drifted towards the shore instead of going to a slip in a marina, and out jumped 8 Haitians,
Right.
as it turns out,
Yeah.
who then, as they were running, there was somehow somebody alerted the Border Patrol. They were on the beach, and they were chasing these guys down.
Right.
It's like something you'd see in the movies.
Yeah. Well, or you see on the news in Florida, South Florida, about once every 2
Right.
months. You see that somehow. Yeah.
So what happened is they arrested all these guys, and they all said that, yeah, we paid a certain amount of money to come into the United States, and they said they paid it to a white Bahamian. And
Your client's a white Bahamian.
White Bahamian. So what happens is they do some investigation, and they discover that the boat was registered to my client. So the next thing they do, about a week or so, all these Haitians are now in lockup. They're in detention at Chrome, which was the detention center at the time. And
Which, by the way, detention center is Alligator Alcaraz or whatever.
yeah.
I think they're shutting it down now.
Well, I
think
just
read
heard today that Kathy Williams, an excellent federal judge, former prosecutor I had cases with, then became the appointed federal public defender. She just ruled that they can't add any more there.
Right.
And it sounds like it's being phased out. Of course, the government will appeal that.
Right. Yes.
And the state will appeal that. Yeah. And who knows where it's going to go. Yeah, but it was an interesting ruling.
Big hot potato, that whole.
Excellent judge.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what happened is, while they're in Chrome, about a week or two later, and this is before my client's even arrested, they're shown photographic lineup.
Right.
About 5 or 6 pictures, and in one of those pictures is the picture of my client, because they knew he was the registered owner of the boat.
Right, and this is standard for investigative tactic to show,
Right.
Potential witnesses a lineup of photos and see if they can pick out the defendant.
So the first person they showed it to, he picked out the client, my client.
Okay.
Then a couple of days later, they showed the photos again to the remaining group, and they all picked out my client.
So unanimous, your client.
Unanimous, picked them out
picked
of the photos. So now the government thinks they've got an excellent case.
Right.
They've got him being the registered owner of the boat, and they've got him being identified as the person they paid money to get on the boat and be taken by a captain to the United States.
Sure.
Somehow, the captain was one of them.
Yes.
All right?
Understood.
So when they said the captain, it was just one of the guys who was also fleeing. And he was here illegally. So what happens then is I get hired, and I start looking into the case. I hire a crackerjack investigator. And we talked about this before.
Yeah, it's really important in our cases that we have a great investigator on them.
Right. Now, what's interesting about investigation is this was back 20-something years, 30-something years ago. And back then, you didn't really have the internet. You didn't have what you have today. Today, my 11-year-old granddaughter could probably do what investigators did back then, and she could probably do an even better job with sitting in front of her computer in her bedroom.
That's right. Yep. That's all.
But back then, you didn't have that. So investigators were like the old movies. They were out there pounding the streets.
They literally were, yeah.
And finding people. So I hired a guy who was a great investigator, since passed away, named Don Carpenter. Any of our listeners who are from the Fort Lauderdale area would know Don. Don worked for a lot of great defense attorneys. Don was amazing and a fun guy to be around.
Yeah, you never even want to know. How did you find that out? Hey, don't even tell me.
Yeah.
I don't know how you found that out, but that's very helpful information.
Right. And in fact, I have to tell a little vignette, a side vignette. The first time I met Don, it was a murder on the high seas case, and we had to go to the Bahamas to find a witness.
Wow. It's almost...
And it was my first case, actually, major case as a defense attorney. I'd been a prosecutor. Sure. So somebody recommended him, I hired him, and then what happened is the night before we're flying to Paradise Island in the Bahamas, he says, I want you to wear a Guayabera shirt, with a Cuban-style shirt with a bunch of pockets. I said, well, maybe I'm thinking like movies and TV. Maybe where we're going to, it's going to fit right in.
Yeah.
I show up at the airport. He sticks 4 cigars in one pocket,
No.
4 cigars in another pocket. I'm carrying his cigars.
That's funny.
I wasn't even a cigar smoker.
That's great.
So we get to the Bahamas. We check into the hotel, and I go up to his room, and I say, Don, okay, where we're going? What are we going to do? Who are we going to see? What alleyway are we going to meet a contact and do all that? And Don picks up the white pages from the telephone book, opens the book, finds the name of the guy that we need to find and the phone number, calls him. We'll see you at 5 o'clock. He says, all right, let's go down and have a drink at the bar.
Well,
I said, that's investigation.
Yeah, that's good old work. Yeah.
So anyway, I hired Don on this alien smuggling case. And one of the things that Don found, first of all, I have to tell you my client's story, which came out in court because I had him testify at the trial. My client said that he was approached by the fellow who turned out to be the captain.
Okay, well, right.
To buy his boat. And he had a handwritten agreement to sell
like a
the
bill,
boat.
okay.
And it was for $36,000. $36,000. Well, it turns out the boat was a piece of...
Right.
Actually, they should have been awarded a medal for surviving
the
trip.
Yeah, you see those boats come on shore and you can't believe they made the trip.
And he said that this guy, Joseph was his name, gave him $9,000. And that he sold him the boat. Joseph was going to pay him the rest. And he gave him the boat because Joseph said he wanted to sea try it.
Okay, which is not unusual with a boat. Yep.
So it turns out, my client's story is, he left with the boat. I had no idea what he did with it. Next thing I know, I'm being told my boat washed up on the shore.
I'm getting arrested.
On the beach, and then I'm getting arrested.
Right.
So, and when he didn't come back, here was the key element. When he didn't come back with the boat right away, because he said he was sea trying it, my client got suspicious, and he made a police report in the Bahamas.
Wow.
Here was the problem. He claims he made a police report in the Bahamas. We couldn't find it.
Really?
I guess the record keeping at that time in the place where he made the police report was really poor. Yeah. And the police kept looking for it. Nobody remembered it. Nobody could find it. Don goes over there, spends 2 days going through an office with papers that are all over the place. The filing system was not very scientific. And he found it.
Amazing.
Okay?
Priceless.
Okay, now here we have a piece of evidence that we're going to introduce, but we know already the case is set for trial. Sometimes when you have evidence that you think you can talk a prosecutor out of prosecuting the case,
Right.
then it becomes a real interesting question. Do you use it then, or do you try to surprise it in trial?
Right. It's a poker. Do you show your hand or
Right.
not? Right.
I mean, one of the amazing things about criminal practice is because the burden of proof is on the government, and you don't have to tell them your client's story. You don't have to give them any information other than physical documents that you're going to use at trial.
The burden's on the prosecutor, the government.
I mean, you have a reciprocal discovery obligation, but there are all sorts of different nuances to that. So because of that, you have the opportunity. If you don't think you're going to be able to talk them out of it, save it for trial and then blow them out of the water.
Right. It's a very important strategic decision.
Yeah, you have to make strategic decisions. So Don also did one other interesting thing. He found out that all of these fellows who identified my client in the photograph actually were in the same unit at Chrome. So when the first guy identified it, it was logical to assume he went back and said, okay, picture number 5.
Right.
And what they did, this was interesting, instead of shifting the pictures in the array, so if my client was the 5th picture in a row, instead of shifting it for the next guy to the 3rd or the 2nd and keep shifting it around, they kept him as number 5. So all they had to tell each other was pick out number 5.
Right.
So then the question became, how was it that the first guy knew to pick out the picture? Now we know why everybody else may have picked it out. How do we know the first guy didn't legitimately pick it out?
Was the first guy the captain that was buying the boat from him?
The captain. You're exactly right. And he's the one who bought the boat from him.
He's the one that actually met with him.
They didn't know that at the time, the government, when they showed him the array. So they assumed he was just another person who paid to go there because he could operate a boat. He was the guy who operated the boat.
Yeah.
So he picked him out because he knew my client through a legitimate business deal, or at least my client thought it was, and then everybody else picked it out. But the best part of the case was when we came in and we showed the jury the document of the sale of the boat.
Right.
And my client was a very believable witness. The jury took about 40 minutes and came back with a not guilty verdict.
So your decision, 'cause you talked earlier about, do we show it to the government, do we not? What your decision was, we are not showing it to the government.
Now, they argued we shouldn't have been able to keep it in, and we argued it was actually impeachment of a witness's testimony. Because when Joseph took the stand,
the captain
took the stand, I said, isn't it true that you bought this boat from my client? Isn't it true you entered into a contract with my client?
Right. So that's a no-lose question, because if he answers yes, you've really made your point. If he answers no, you can now impeach him and enter this document.
And one of the exceptions to having turned over the document to begin with is if I'm using it simply to impeach a witness, to impeach his credibility, attack his credibility. So what happened is when he said, no, I never.
We call that open the door.
Right. Then I showed it to him, and he froze. I said, that's your signature, isn't it? That's your name, isn't it? He didn't answer. I said, Your Honor, would you compel the witness to answer? Judge said, are you going to answer the question? He said, I don't know. I don't know. Now, by that point, you could see the jury rolling their eyes.
Right, they know.
So now that combined with my client's story, with the suggestion that the witnesses all picked out the photograph because they were all coached, it was a no-brainer
Yeah.
for the jury.
You know, it's such a difficult decision for us as lawyers to make, and we discuss it with the client that, hey, we could go meet with the prosecutor and lay this all out because we have a strong case here and hope they see it the way we do and we'll dismiss it. And now you're no risk going, because the trial, they dismiss it, there's
Right.
no risk of a trial anymore. Or we hold it back and we go to trial and hopefully we get the right verdict. But when you show it to the prosecutor, there's no guarantee that they're going to see it the way we see it and dismiss and get the outcome we want. Is, hey, dismiss these charges. We're showing you there's no criminal case here.
And the interesting thing is this. A lot of the cases, as I said earlier, that come to me are, especially in the white-collar area in federal court, are way before they're actually arrested or charged. It's at that time that it's easier to come forward.
Right.
And try to convince them not to charge because they haven't already made the effort. They haven't as much sweat equity in it. The agents don't have as much sweat equity in it. But once the charge is made, once the arrest is made, once the government has filed all that, it's a lot more difficult for them to turn around and dismiss it.
Yeah. And, you know, a lot of times in investigations like this, the detectives, the agents, they'll reach out to the suspect. The terms in our industry are suspect or target or person of interest. They'll reach out to that person and say, hey, this is what we're investigating. Will you talk to us? In this case, they do that very often. A lot of times they'll talk. A lot of times they'll say, no, I'd like a lawyer. In this case, it sounds like because he was Bahamian, he flew in, they wanted to grab him. Maybe they were concerned that they would lose him.
Right.
And so instead of
Very likely.
them having a sit down with him, they proceeded with getting the warrant. He flew in, they grabbed him.
Right.
Which is a shame because if they hadn't done that, you're right, all these resources, all this time may not have been spent and wasted
Right.
on a case they never should have.
Well, you know, quite often it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck. It is a duck.
Right. A lot of people jump to those conclusions. They don't dig a little deeper to make sure it all proves out.
Right.
The other thing that was interesting to me when you started telling the story, and I was going to jump in, but I said, let me hear how this plays out. I love these photo lineups or in-person lineups, you know, because there's a lot of case law out there about, as viewers, you can imagine, if the suspect is 6 feet tall, white, and bald, and there's 6 people in a lineup, whether it's in person or photographs, you can't have a bunch of 5'5" people with a full head of hair, you know, that are a different color than the suspect. They have to, you know, be similar in look and shape. And
can't be suggestive, overly suggestive.
And you did point out that point about they didn't mix the position of the photos around. They kept them in the same position, which is contrary with some of the law out there. But yeah, they can't. We've seen scenarios where it's kind of the pictures are all dark, and there's one picture that's a little lighter than the other. And of course, the natural instinct is to go to that.
And when you have multiple witnesses come in and tell a similar story, it's very effective for the prosecution. Because now it's much easier for a jury to think, oh, it's not just one guy making a mistake or making something up. It's all these people. So how do you, as a defense attorney, lay the foundation for being able to argue that this is just a concocted story? And interesting, in another case, this wasn't a case I handled, but I heard about, there were a number of people on different floors at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Miami who were cooperating against the defendant, and they all were telling a similar story. And the government was arguing in that case. They were on totally different floors. They had no contact. The floors did not intermix. There was no joint activities. How would it be that they would be able to concoct a story? And it turned out what the defense found out is they were communicating with each other. You know how? It's bizarre.
Oh.
Through the toilets.
Really? Yeah.
Through the toilets, they were talking from the floor above or the floor below, and the guy would be there, and they would literally hear faintly the information.
Yeah. Right. And good lawyering, good private investigative work. Maybe
or bad toilets.
Bad toilets in that case. Let's just hope they flushed properly.
Well, I guess it was risky trying to do that. But
you know, it's a shame because a lot of people who may not be guilty wind up being convicted because they don't have this type of lawyering, or private investigative work, or a good break in their case and so forth.
Just like you were talking about before, there are a lot of cases where victims are not served or victims' families not served because there's not the investigation that needs to be done. Clearly on the defense side, as we know, there are many cases, and a lot of those cases are the cases that the Innocence Project and other things like that are looking into, because the lawyering was either at a very poor level or they just didn't have the resources to really investigate. And of course, a lot of those cases were pre-DNA.
Yes.
And now with DNA science, they're able to show, that the client was in fact innocent.
Right. Left and right now,
But
after 20, 30
years.
Yeah.
And no matter how much money they get from the state, it doesn't make up for that.
It does not. It does not.
I just can't imagine what that would be like. Not to mention, okay, you're out, you have all this money, but you're ill-equipped to deal with life as it is now. You've been institutionalized, 3 hots and a cot for however many years.
Right. It's very, very difficult, if impossible, to transition. So we'll talk about that more in some other episodes,
Yes.
I think, as well as we'll, I'm sure, one day do a whole episode just on victims and victims' rights
Yes.
and so forth.
Yeah, I think
So
might be able to get a prosecutor.
I would love
talk
that.
about that.
Yeah, I think the viewers would really enjoy listening
Yes.
to a prosecutor.
All right, so
All right.
until then, ladies and gentlemen,
You're free to go. Down Low Investigations is a sponsor of You're Free to Go. Behind every great criminal defense attorney is a great private investigator. That's why Marc and I use Down Low to investigate cases all over the country. Down Low can help you too, whether you're running a background check on an employee or running a background check on a blind date, or let's say you need someone followed or some other type of investigative work conducted. Down Low is the way to go. Call Download Investigations at 561-843-1806. Everything expressed and discussed in this episode are the opinions and experiences of attorneys Guy Fronstin and Marc Nurek and their guests. All ethical rules are complied with. Attorney-client privilege and confidential information is not shared or released during these episodes, and names, dates, locations, and other identifying information may be changed to protect confidentiality. Topics are embellished, and none of the statements made constitute legal advice and should not be considered or relied on as such.